Hello. Wow, that slide is very sudden. What's up, everybody? How's everything going? Cool. So I'm gonna try to jump into it relatively quickly here, just because I have a lot of material I want to be able to cover, and I want to make sure I save some time for questions too. So if you came to the same talk that I gave last year, it's kind of a similar talk, I will say, but I changed it up a little bit to think a little bit more about how you want to start your career as well, and maybe just kind of the different options that you have available. So yeah, I mean, maybe I'll just jump into it. And if you have any questions, I think there's a Slido, which I'll monitor, as well as, kind of wherever, just shoot them out. We'll probably find them. Okay, cool. So yeah, I guess I'll start with who I am, and then I'll talk about purpose of the talk. So who I am. So yeah, my name is Jacob. I'm an early startup employee. So clear bias for startups here. So keep that in mind as I chat. I run an engineering team at the company that I work at, which is called Lunch Club. We're actually sponsoring Hack the North this year for the first time. So if you want to see me throughout the event, chat with me afterwards, there is a Hack the North Lunch Club channel on the Discord. So hit me up there. That's where I'm going to be for the whole weekend. So yeah, I've also run partnerships in the past. I ran partnerships for actually Hack the North for about 3 years, and was a Waterloo grad back in 2017 from computer science. So I've done both kind of businessy side, the computer science side, the tech side, and yeah, seen a bunch of stuff in my pretty short career so far. So yeah, just kind of talk about what's coming up here. So we've got some ground rules about what this talk's all about. The first topic I want to cover is figuring out what to do. So that's kind of the how to start your career part. The third topic, or I guess second topic, I want to kind of talk about how companies think. And then after that, I want to show you how to use that information. And then I'll wrap up with some edge cases and some Q&A. So I guess, first of all, this talk really isn't going to be for everyone. Some of these topics will be applicable for most places, but some of the numbers and stuff will probably not make sense outside of tech. So I think kind of most importantly, this is going to be for technical offers. So think like machine learning, software engineer, data engineer, developer, words like that. It's probably somewhat applicable for program product manager type roles, data analyst, data science, think like highly technical roles. It's probably only really applicable, at least the number portion. I guess this slide here really talks about the salary ranges and numbers and stuff that I'll talk about, whereas kind of the principles are true no matter what career you're in, but this is really largely for US and Canadian offers, includes remote, which I guess is cool and I think still topical. I'm mostly going to be focusing on numbers for first-time full-time job offers. So some of this stuff definitely applies for interns. I've been able to negotiate intern opportunities before as well. I know it's a big deal for Waterloo. You can do it, but I think mostly your first big negotiation and your first kind of big thought process about what am I going to do is going to be your first full-time job offer. And it's really important that you haven't signed that job offer yet. If you've signed your job offer, it's like way too late for you to negotiate that job offer. So this talk is kind of interesting. I want this talk to be kind of more of like a mindset shifting talk more than anything else. So it'll have some resources, but it's relatively resource light, I think. And it's more kind of giving you kind of a different framework from which to think about how to make these decisions, and also maybe give you a peek behind the curtain, if you will, about like how kind of the system works. So hopefully I accomplished that goal, and I'll save some time for questions at the end. So I'm going to talk about first, like, figuring out what to do. This is a very common problem. Everybody has this. This is true for anyone, even the people who you think have it all figured out. They're all just kind of rolling by the seat of their pants. I think it's very important to realize that nobody has it figured out. So these are going to be like a mindset, like I mentioned, kind of give you a framework of thinking about how you want to think about what to do. That was kind of a weird sentence. But yeah, I'll jump into it. It'll hopefully make some sense. So I guess I want to talk about like what's out there, right? So like, what is the scope of the things that you actually can do, right? So I think one important distinction is that basically there's like two different types of roles in the world. There are roles that are principal roles, and there are roles that are agent roles. I'll define what that means. So a principal is basically an owner, like somebody who owns something, They could be a founder. They could be like an early partner, an early member of the team. They have a lot of equity in the company, for instance. Executive VPs, people who like own things, like they own the product, they own a team, they own the company, right? These are principals, right? And then there are agents, and agents work for the principals. So agents are the people who are your employees. They're the people who you probably work with, the people, software engineers. They're the people who do the work mostly, and are the people who take the work from the principals and make it happen, right? And I think one important thing to think about from a framework perspective is that you actually kind of implicitly or explicitly, depending on if you're thinking about this, choose which one of these camps you want to join when you start your job, your full time. So, if you want to join an early stage startup, or you want to start your own company, or you want to do something, on the earlier side, you're probably deciding to be a principal, right? You're deciding to take on a lot of ownership, a lot of responsibility. You're, planning to kind of go in a route that nobody really knows the outcome for. So you're probably acting like a principal there. If you join, a big FANG company, if you join and work for the government, this is true for kind of early stage roles. Of course, there are principal roles within these companies, but for your first job, you're going to be hired as a software engineer at Facebook, for instance. You're probably an agent in that case. And I want to just note, like, this isn't a value judgment. Like, there's not one that's better than the other. And some people are very happy to be taken away from the craziness that is running a company. Like, it's very, very stressful. Whereas other people couldn't possibly sit there and take instruction from people. It's really a personality thing, right? So it's not a value judgment, but I think it's a helpful framework to think about when you're looking for what you want to do initially. Do you want to have a role where you're a big owner, or do you want to have a role where you're kind of learning? And I'll kind of break that down a little bit. So let's see. So I guess, broadly speaking as well, all of these are very broad terms. There are like 3 different types of companies. Really, there's a bunch of different types, but you kind of have startups, which are 150 or so employees or less, I would say, depending on what financing stage they're at. Mid-stage companies, less than 1,000 people, and like large companies, more than 1,000 people. I think this is relatively straightforward. I think people mostly know this. I guess a fun fact for the number 150, that is actually a meaningful number. I'm using it here because it's actually called the Dunbar number. It's basically the set of individuals for which a community afterwards will break down. So it's basically the number of people you can just know. So your friend group, for instance, at least the close friends that you will think about often, basically cannot be more than 150 people before you would lose track of those groups. It's the same for a company. So by the time you're a company over 150 people, you probably don't know everyone within the company. That's maybe how I'm defining startup here. But fascinating research there. I broke this down also into like different things that people care about when they're looking for roles. These are, again, also pretty broad, and they're kind of categorized pretty lightly here. But thinking about startups, you're thinking about a role that is high ownership. It's also going to be high risk. Startups fail all the time. You're probably going to have almost no mentorship. So if you need or would like to have strong mentorship out of the gate, probably don't join a startup. It's not going to be there for you. Your personal ROI, meaning the amount you're probably going to get out of learning in that role, is really high. It's the best thing you can do if you want to learn really, really quickly. Your financial ROI, at this point, honestly, I would probably say it's high. A lot of companies right now are being invested in. There's way more money than there is startups to fund that money with right now, which is a really interesting problem. And I think startups, by and large now, you're actually paid pretty well. The likelihood of you having an exit down the road still is pretty low, but you're paid generally okay for the time. And I think in the long term, that personal ROI is definitely going to return financial ROI to some degree. And then life balance, I put medium low here. I'll be honest, it's probably low. You need to essentially decide that the startup that you're working on is probably going to be the most important thing in your life, if not one of the 2 most important things. So it's not a great career path if you're looking to quit work at 5 p.m. every day, being completely honest. So on a mid-stage company, again, this is kind of between 150, 1,000 people or so. Your ownership's probably medium low already at this stage. Like, people are pretty specialized, and you being able to own something early on is probably pretty unlikely. Your risk tolerance is medium low as well, probably more on the medium side. Mid-stage companies can still fail. Mentorship, medium high at this point. I think by this time, companies are sort of realizing that they need to invest in their people internally to move to the next step. That's really, really important. So mentorship's like medium high. Your personal ROI, I think it's probably medium. You're getting the benefit of some good mentorship. You're getting the benefit of maybe a little bit of ownership, a little bit of undefined problems. Your financial ROI, I think also probably medium. These companies tend to be pretty average paying companies, I would say. And then I think also medium life balance. So it's kind of the middling child. Clearly, it's a mid-stage company. I think a lot of these companies will have kind of a more relaxed work culture than a startup would have, for instance. Depends again on the stage. We'll talk about that in a second. But by and large, you're somewhere in the middle there. And then this is large companies. Your ownership is going to be incredibly low when you first start. You'll probably own nothing, and it'll take probably many years for you to be an owner of any part of the code. Your risk tolerance is going to be incredibly low. Like these big companies are not going to go belly up in the next 3 years. I think when you're thinking about risk, you probably need to start looking at not a 10 or 15 year period. Realistically, you're not going to be at that company that long. Think maybe 2 to 3 years. In a 2 to 3 year period, your FANG is not going to go anywhere. Your startup will probably disappear. Mentorship at large companies is really good. This is something large companies tend to do very, very, very well. And you probably learn a lot when you're at that company from people who also know a lot of things. Of course, it's variable, but I would say on average, mentorship is quite good at these large companies. I would say you probably won't get a lot of personal ROI. You're not going to have a lot of great stuff to put on your resume. If you spend 2 years at a big tech company, you might have 3 or 4 interesting bullet points, but you'll have to kind of scrunch for it. Financial ROI, medium high. These companies will pay very, very well, especially if you're very, very good. And honestly, this is the golden ticket to like a relaxed, easy life where you also tend to make a lot of money. So if that's what you're looking for, big company is perfect for you. You'll learn a lot from strong mentors within the company. You'll probably make a decent amount of money, and you'll have a pretty good life balance. So if it's, if you don't want it to be a huge priority in your life, that's totally fine. And again, like this is not a workaholic talk. This is like a figure out what's best for you talk, right? So if you want to have a more relaxed work life so that you can go and do way more stuff outside of work, make it happen. And a large company is a perfect spot for that. Here's some kind of keywords. I thought this would be useful to kind of identify these companies because a lot of the times the companies will say things, but they won't actually be true. So it's very popular to say you're a startup. And I will say that most of the time you're probably not a startup. So here's what you'll hear when you'll see startup. So you'll see small size is obviously a keyword, seed stage or series A. I think anything beyond series A, maybe B, you're kind of like in a different bracket now. Those are funding rounds, by the way, if you're not familiar. Early stage means the same thing. Probably the founders are hiring you. If it's an early stage company, you're talking to a founder as part of that process for sure. They probably don't have a hiring process at all or very little defined process. It's very fluid. It's very, very interesting getting a role at an early stage startup. You're definitely gonna have equity in that offer, like 100% chance. You've probably never heard of that company. So those are some key things to look for. If you have any of those things or all of those things, it's probably a startup. Mid-stage, this is the companies that will lie to you about being a startup. So if they're a series, a C, a D, or an E, they're probably not a startup anymore. I would say they're a mid-stage company. They're growing, growth stage. They have a hands-on hiring team. You might not meet the CEO. They probably have news articles about them. They're starting to kind of gain traction. One word you'll see a lot is hyper growth. Companies that are in growth are probably mid-stage companies. And then if it's a large company, obviously it's thousands of employees. It's probably a public company or it's the government, or they're really in late financing rounds. They have a really rigid hiring process. They probably have RSUs included in the offer, which is a fancy word for stock options after a company goes public. Their CEO probably tweets a lot, and they're probably on trial for some US antitrust law. So if those things are true, it's probably a big stage company. I want to do some broad strokes about work. Basically, one important thing is you really, really should be working on something you care about. Life is short. Honestly, you're in tech, and if you're watching this and you're a software engineer, you have such a marketable skill that you have the unique advantage of being able to work on things you care about. So really, there are so many tech companies. You have a very in-demand skill. Work on something you care about. Do not spend time working on something you don't. If you work on something you care about, it's by and large true that you're going to be more performant, you're going to be higher motivation, and you'll learn more, you'll do more, you'll take more away from the role. And by the time you move to the next role, you'll be in a much better place and probably earn a lot more money at a company where you're motivated and really putting out a lot of work compared to a company where you're not. Just uniformly true. I think also work should probably align with the importance of career. I kind of talked about this a little bit. How you put your career in your life. Is it the most important thing to you? Is it more important for you to have XYZ lined up before career? Again, like maybe the big tech company makes a lot more sense if career is third or fourth down the line for you. Maybe you care about family. Maybe you care about like getting out and hiking on the weekends. Like these are the kind of things I think you should be thinking about when you're thinking about what you want to do for work. And it's way more important that you do something that you care about than something you hate that you're well paid for. You're in tech, you're going to probably be well paid no matter where you end up. And I think it's really, really important that, it might be 30,000 more and you're doing something you hate. It's not worth it. Just take the pay cut and just like do something you love. It'll pay off in the long run, 100%. The money becomes not that important, especially when you're doing already pretty well. I also want to talk about role. Role is really not that important. Do not feel like you're pigeonholed into being a back-end engineer or front-end engineer. These things are very, very fluid. Most important thing you should look for is team. Make sure you like the team that you're going to join. They are the people you're working with. And that is really the absolute crutch that you'll deal with day in, day out. At a small company, especially, team is everything and roles basically don't exist. At a large company, teams can be switched after a little bit. And typically you got to like prove that you want to be able to switch a role. So maybe they have internal interview processes. So just consider that, depending on how important the role is to you. Also, no job description is perfect. If you see a company that you're really, really interested in and they don't have a role open for you, but you still think that like, hey, like this is the work that I want to do, reach out to them. They probably don't have every job open. You could probably convince them to hire you if you're really, really good. And, kind of the thing that's, time honored truth is that like, job requirements are more of a list of nice to haves than they are really a list of requirements. So it's probably more important that you're the one driving your role than it is kind of to fit the original job description. So, keep that in mind. Like if you see a company you really care about, just reach out to them. Like, honestly, the worst thing they'll say is no, it happens, but, at least you've tried, right? And probably mix your role with something you're probably good at, with something you want to get better at, ideally. This is difficult to do on your first role for sure. So, but that's kind of an ideal thing. Okay, cool. And then I want to add a slide here because I know people are going to ask me sort of like, what's like the thing to do to like make the most money? Or like, I would rather phrase that as like, what's the thing to do to make a decision? Like, what is the right decision to make for you to have the most impact, which impact almost always translates to outcome, like financial outcome. So here's my advice. Like if you want to have a huge financial windfall someday, you need to immediately start looking for roles that have ownership. Look for those principal roles. You need to have ownership to make mistakes. In an environment where you have no ownership, you can't mess up. Every time you mess up, you learn faster. So be in an environment where you can make mistakes. And ownership is that forcing function to being able to learn a lot. Next point, very obvious, you have to be in a role where you're learning a lot. The more you know is the thing that gets you value in life, right? So if you can solve new problems that people haven't solved from scratch and actually be successful in doing so, that's the world's most valuable skill. And you'll always be able to make money from doing so. So keep that in mind. Your skill and ability is forever. If you lost all your money tomorrow, but you've built up all these skills, you can just do it again. That's why you have serial founders that tend to have a great outcome at some point. It's because they're learning so much. And at some point, like it's just a matter of luck, but they'll get there eventually. And then the last point is you want to play long-term games, building long-term value. So short-term is kind of the antithesis of like everything that we're talking about here. You want to be looking for the long-term. So if you want to have an outsized outcome, it almost always has to be over a many-year period. It's very rare for companies to, or you to be able to do something in 6 months that results in billions of dollars of value. It really doesn't exist unless it's probably a scam. So, think about positive sum games, think about long-term value, and you'll probably totally be fine. So there's a really good tweet storm by this guy named Naval, who parts of this section is kind of based on. I think it's his pinned tweet on Twitter, which he's just like @/Naval. Read that. it summarizes, does a much better job of this quick summary. It's like a 60 tweet storm. So read that, you'll learn a lot. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna kind of pick up the pace because I realize I'm already behind. So I want to talk about how companies think, and I'll talk about why that is in the next section. But basically, you got the offer. It's really, really hard to get an offer in tech. So first of all, it's a big thing to get an offer, right? So you probably worked really hard. You made a really great impression with the people you interviewed with, and you probably fit a unique need. Like every job is different, right? So you worked hard and you got a great offer, right? The important thing is that like the companies also had to do a lot of work to get that offer to you, right? So they basically probably worked even harder. I'm going to be honest, like to get you a job offer, because they had to like put out a job description. They had to wait for people to come in. They had to like incentivize their employees to like refer people. They had to like organize all these interviews. They had to like take employees out of work and like get them interviewing you. They had to like constantly like reassess how good you were and against every other person they've ever interviewed, which at some point become thousands of people. It's really hard to hire people, right? So companies are working really hard to send you that offer. So that's really important to realize because hiring really sucks. Like it sucks for everybody. Like nobody loves interviewing. And on the company side, it is so hard to hire people. So if you are great talent, and even if you're, good talent, talent is really scarce. Like lots of people are not good at what they do, right? So if you're good at what you do, that's amazing. And this is strictly beneficial to you, right? So it's really, really important to know that talent is scarce, right? I mean, other things that are really hard is that like first impressions are really highly variable, right? Like maybe you were just having an off day when you interviewed, and that was it, right? There's even studies that show that like bail judges are more likely to grant bail if it's after lunch because they're not hungry anymore. This is just like the way that we work. Like there's a lot of bias in hiring and it sucks, right? Every interview is really, really unique. It's hard to benchmark it against other things. If you sit and interview like, kind of catch up interviews with everybody else and just kind of like talk about how you feel about different people going through the process, it is like exhausting. Like, I don't understand how you can be so tired talking for like 20 minutes, but it's a lot of work to like think through these issues. In tech, like technical screening questions are like sometimes hit or miss. Like some people who are really good might just not get the question because it's kind of just like a random question. Sometimes people might just get it because they memorized it out of a book, right? That's not great either. And of course, like the most important thing here is it's a scarce resource, and you also have to spend your scarce resources, your engineering time, to hire these people, right? So it's really expensive to hire people. That's the point of this, right? So yeah, there's the big slide that says exactly what I just said. Okay, so that's great. Why does that matter? Like, why is this framework worth thinking about? And it's important because you have leverage now. The minute that you get a job offer, you have essentially caused all this pain to get to that offer, knowing or unknowing. And because of that, it takes at least that much more pain to send that job offer to somebody else, right? And that's the leverage part, right? Is that basically you use that leverage of the expense and the time invested to put that offer in front of you to negotiate for the things that you want, right? So unless you know what it costs to hire somebody, you also don't understand like how you can actually make a reasonable assessment on like what you can ask them for, right? So that's why I wanted to like stress a lot about kind of how companies are hiring, because now you kind of understand like on the other side, all the investment that was put in, right? But the thing to keep in mind is that the minute that you sign that offer, you lose all that negotiation power. So that's why there's always signature deadlines, because the company's like, they've got it out to you and they just want you to sign that thing so that they can breathe, right? Because after that, they like, we've got the person, they're coming. And it is a great feeling, right? So when that's out to you, it's scary for the company, because they really want to make sure they get you in, and they'll be able to basically do anything to get you in. But the minute you sign, it's over, right? So keep that in mind. So I did some napkin math here. I want to just kind of like talk a little bit about like what that's like on the company side. So it's probably about 200 candidates you'll see to get to a hire. So that's reviewing a lot of people, and that's not resumes. That's like candidates through like the first phone screen. So resumes, it's in the thousands probably, but candidates, going through a phone screen maybe about 200. It probably takes at least 175 hours to hire somebody. So if you put that in, weeks, 40-hour weeks, you're investing at least a month of your company's like human hour time into each hire. That's probably a low bound, I would say. And of course, there's no guarantee that person's going to work out. You make hires that don't work out all the time, right? So it's important to consider that all of this kind of goes in, and there's no guarantee at the end of the day, which is a terrible deal. So yeah, hiring sucks. So I did a bunch of napkin math here. I don't know if I like this number at all, but I think if anything, the number is probably higher. But I think 15,000 is probably a bare minimum best case for hiring an engineer. That includes like first-time, full-time engineers. It's really expensive to hire. And I think $15,000 in time does not even include the lost time building your product, does not include the opportunity cost of things that those people could have been doing, or the people they could have been talking to. Like 15,000 is just the dollar figure, but it doesn't kind of attach all the other important things that go into it as well. So I put the 15,000 here just because I think it's a good base number to talk about, and saying that like there is no free hire, right? It's going to actually cost your company money. That's just salary money to actually make that hire. And basically that number is probably, whatever that number is probably the negotiation window. Think about it as like, what is the dollar figure that it would take to hire another one of me, right? So basically in that case, you can just essentially use that as your leverage, right? So, I think it's really important to pause here as well. And I want to say that like, this is a highly variable number. Some companies can handle negotiation, some can't, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well, right? But every job offer is different, right? There's no such thing as a standard job offer. The closest thing to that would be like a big tech, like FANG offer or something, right? And I think it's also important to note that that leverage is a good thing. Like you actually should use this to get what you need, because you being happy in your role is going to make you stay longer. It's going to make you feel more fulfilled by your role. And companies want you to obviously have these things, right? So of course, the naturally follows that like when you leave and the company goes to replace you, it's just as expensive. So they want to make sure that you stay happy. Okay, so this is kind of the negotiation section, which is how to use this, right? So I want to bring some like brief tips about negotiating, and kind of like how to think about negotiation. So first of all, definition of negotiation: a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement. I think it's very important to realize there's no like scary words in here. There's no like dollar signs in this number. It just says a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement. Very simple. Negotiations are not that scary. All of us have a different relationship with negotiating, right? Some of us use it a lot, and some of us almost never negotiate, right? Some of us are kind of more timid and maybe like aren't kind of trying to like fulfill that part, and kind of other people are naturally like maybe more aggressive. I think those are kind of the ways that people think about negotiating. But I would actually challenge that and say that actually like good negotiation is actually empathetic. So people who are really aggressive will tend to actually negotiate worse. So the reason it's empathetic is because you need to understand what the other person can do for you to be able to successfully negotiate. So basically the whole understanding of like the pain that company has gone through, for you to then empathize with that pain. I know it sounds weird, and then extract more money from them. That's still empathy, right? Like you understand that it has been difficult to hire you, and therefore you don't want to have them go back to the drawing board. So you're going to make sure that this aligns right with what you want, right? So it's a skill in empathy, right? I think also it's important to note that negotiation is the standard expectation. If you don't negotiate, that's actually kind of weird. Most people will try to negotiate their full-time offers and have a conversation about negotiation. It is the standard expectation. You're supposed to talk about compensation some point in the process. And I mean, I think Waterloo talks about this during the co-op program, if you're part of it, that even bringing it up during the interview isn't crazy. And that's actually helpful because, maybe you're actually like off, right? Like maybe the company really can't pay you at all what you're expecting. And, that's an early conversation to have in some cases. And, maybe it just doesn't work out, and that's totally fine, right? And I think also like one thing to note is that negotiation isn't this like scary word that should be reserved for like things that only have to do with money, or things that only have to do with like, high strung like court cases. You like negotiate with people every day, right? Like if your roommate says like, oh, like, should we go out to dinner tonight? And you're like, oh, like I actually can't go to dinner tonight. Like I have plans. Like, can we go out tomorrow night? Right? Like that's a discussion aimed at a resolution, right? You both want to go to dinner, and you'll negotiate to go to dinner tomorrow night. I know we don't think about it in these terms, but it's just easier with friends, right? This is just a discussion with an agreement, right? So I also want to add this slide here about when not to negotiate. The answer is never. You should always try to negotiate. I want to put this here purposefully so that you feel, actually you realize that this is important. You actually should be negotiating these things. And I think like one thing that also I'll talk about a little bit is that people almost always negotiate just for salary. You actually don't have to just negotiate for salary. You can negotiate for a lot of different things. So don't just negotiate for the salary you want, but also the life you do. I'm going back to like talking about how what role does work play in your life. I think it's important to make sure that like what you're negotiating for also kind of, features that as much as possible, right? So this is kind of the slide of like what you can negotiate. The answer is literally anything. They'll send you a job offer a job offer, and in the job offer they have lines, and every line says some word. You can negotiate any word on any line in the job offer. You really can. It will get annoying at some point if you're going through line by line. But here's some options just to kind of give you some thoughts to negotiate. You can totally negotiate vacation time. If it starts with 2 weeks, maybe ask for 3. A lot of times they'll just give it to you. Benefits and timeline. A lot of benefits kick in after 3 months. You just ask them to kick in right away. They'll probably do that for you. Equity and profit sharing. So of course you can negotiate your equity offer or your stock bonus, or if there's a profit sharing, of course that's all negotiable. Negotiating your signing bonus or adding a signing bonus, of course, negotiable. Some more exotic ones now, maybe a travel stipend. I guess that's probably kind of interesting now that we're probably going to go to a remote culture. So maybe you want all those trips to be covered by the company when you come into the office. You can probably do that. Again, office schedule, probably more related now than it was the last time I gave this talk, which is cool. I guess we're going back to the office. You can negotiate when you're in the office. You can, of course, negotiate for them to pay for you to go get an MBA or something, post-education studies. Up to you if you want to do that. I think one cool thing I like seeing people negotiate into a contract, it's not really a money now, but it's more like, we'll negotiate into the contract that in 6 months from now, me and my kind of, my superior will have a conversation where we'll sit down and we'll talk about how my performance is so far, and we'll talk about a promotion, right? So it's kind of interesting that you can actually like negotiate into your contract that like 6 months time from now, provided everything's going well, you'll probably get a bigger salary bump. So that's maybe something interesting to look into. Expenses account, pretty self-explanatory. Food, that kind of thing. You can negotiate for that. Some contracts are a little bit more set. There's things that some companies won't be able to do either legally or from some perspective. But these are just to give you an idea. These are some things you can negotiate for. I want to go over a bunch of fears, just because I know that a lot of people are really hesitant about negotiating and have a lot of common fears. So just some things I've like heard over the years. What if a company like retracts your offer because you've negotiated with them? It is never going to happen. Like hopefully like the beginning of this presentation has explained to you that it would be just crazy for that company to like go through all the work of getting to where they are today and then just drop an offer because you're trying to negotiate. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't align with the way that they're spending their time. And if they do that, which I've never heard of happening, that is a huge red flag. Like the fact that they're not like thinking straight at all should be a big red flag. And you probably don't want to work at a company that would do that. Because in a year from now, when you go and try to negotiate a bump or whatever, they'll probably do the same thing, right? So, if a company is not open to a negotiation on anything or drops your offer because of it, don't feel bad about it. Feel like you dodged a bullet because it really won't be the place you want to work. And another question kind of common fears is like, what if I ask for too much? What if I make an unreasonable request? They'll just tell you. It's that simple. Like they'll be like, hey, like we can't do that, right? Other fears, like you don't want to like negotiate, like inconvenience them. Like they're busy people. Like Jacob, you just told me about all the work that they just did to give me this offer. Like, how dare I like put more work into the process? It's their job, right? I mean, plain and simple. Like it's their job to hire you as a happy employee. And that includes negotiating with you, right? So I think it's important to realize that you're going to be the only person who goes to bat for yourself. Maybe if you work at a company and you have like a friend at that company, or you're applying to a company and that your friend is there, like maybe they'll go to bat for you. But again, like you are your biggest cheerleader. So you're the only one who's going to negotiate for you. So, the buck stops with you, and you really have to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. And, to inconvenience somebody for a couple hours one time over a 3-year period that you work with them is not a big deal. Another common thing that is like, my offer is pre-negotiated. It doesn't make any sense. Like, again, like why would a company ever do this? It just financially doesn't make sense for a company to pre-negotiate. There are very specific companies, and I'm talking about like maybe 5 companies who have public salaries for which anybody on earth, including employees, can see these salaries. And in those cases, maybe they're pre-negotiated. So if you're working for one of those companies or applying to one of those companies, you will know. But in general, this is never the case. Cool. So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about how to negotiate, obviously. I wanted to provide some more like guidelines rather than an actual like how-to guide. There are a million of those. Just Google how to negotiate. I think number one is that you obviously want to be very clear in your asks and well-researched. You can't provide vagueness in a negotiation. You need to be very explicit about what you're looking for and what that looks like for you. It's also helpful to be well-researched so that you know what you actually can ask for. Look at Glassdoor, average salary trackers. There's levels at FYI. See what other people are making at the same company, and try to ask for something reasonable within that range. But yeah, just be very clear. Don't be vague. Number 2 is actually get on a call. This is probably like the one that's on here that is the hardest to do, and for everyone, is that, yeah, it's like hard to get on calls with people. But again, we talked about this, like negotiation is empathy. It is really hard to empathize with somebody over an email. I know that you would rather sit in your room and craft the perfect email and take 6 hours to do that. Just take a 30-minute phone call, do all your prep beforehand, and make sure you know what your talking points are, sure. But get on a call, because the only way for them to empathize with you, the only way for it to be less weird and awkward, is honestly talk about it. So really get on a phone call. It helps a lot. And then I think 3 is to be like flexible and responsive. I think like it's really important to be responsive here. Like you can't be the blocker of the negotiating. If you are the person who started the negotiation process, probably should be the person that is not slowing it down. You only really need to talk to you and like maybe your parents, but they need to talk to a whole company. So if they're being able to get a reply back to you faster than you can get a reply back to them, it's not necessarily great. Within reason, like, reply back to them within a day. But generally be pretty responsive, suggest alternatives quickly, be flexible, like be, like an active contributor to the conversation, right? So you don't want to be a blocker. Anyway, 3 quick points. And then, obviously people are asking like, well, how do I start negotiating? Just say, how flexible is this? You get the offer and you say, hey, thanks so much for the offer. Really appreciate it. How flexible is this? You've started the conversation. They'll probably say something like, yeah, we're open to discussing. Your negotiation has begun, right? So, it's a nice word to start out with. It's nice and simple, and again, pretty easy. Cool. I want to talk about edge cases, quick 5 minutes, and then we'll go to questions for 15 minutes. So just different edge cases, different things to keep in mind. So startups are almost always going to give you equity and salary. Again, this only applies for tech roles. Equity is going to be in the form of options. It's important to note that salary feeds you. It puts a roof above your head. It allows you to buy clothes. Your equity does not. Okay, so keep that in mind, that you need to at least make enough money for you to survive in terms of salary. The equity, though, might allow you to buy a small country someday, right? So there is a balance here. It's very company dependent. I'm not going to be the one to settle the debate of like what this should look like, right? But it's important to realize that your equity is probably, if it's early stage startup, not going to pay out for many years down the road, and you won't be able to, otherwise survive on that equity, right? So it's really important that you at least have enough to feed yourself and do that kind of thing, right? It's relatively true as a result that you can, at early stage companies, take less salary, get more equity. Relatively true. They have less money than they have equity at the beginning. And just kind of, this is more of a Series A note, but most companies have around 10% of their shares in the ESOP, which is the employee stock options plan or pool. That means that, just keep in mind, you can't make crazy requests. Like if you are employee number 20 and you're asking for 15% of the company, they don't have that to give you. So typically, this is a lot lower than you would probably expect. I guess I'm kind of skipping ahead to the next point. 0.5% equity, for instance, is actually a really good offer, probably for like a fifth employee. So it goes down pretty quick. So companies are a lot stingier than you would expect, especially right now, because it's a very cash-rich environment. And also, if you're going to be applying to startups, it's really important that you at least know what a pre-seed, a seed, a Series A, B, C is. These are terms you'll hear a lot. These are funding rounds and different statuses. That's in order of ascending stage of the company. And I mean, if you knew that, you now know everything you need to know about that, basically. So yeah, that's startups. I think large companies also, of course, have their own edge cases. FANG in particular has really, I think, cracked down on hiring in the last couple of years. They're typically internal guidelines, is what I mean by cracking down. They now have a playbook. There used to be kind of a bit of a wild, wild west time for a bit, where I know a lot of people were getting great offers that FANG would just absolutely never give out anymore. So that was the golden age. Sorry you missed that boat. Startups are still the golden age, so go hang out with startups if you want those outcomes. But I think by and large, like there are a lot of more just stringent internal guidelines. The offers will be negotiable, but less so than maybe other companies, at least in terms of the bands, is what I mean by that. But if you're really, really, really good, FANG will probably just pay you whatever you want. They obviously have way more money than sense. So if you are truly the top 1% of the 1% of candidates, congratulations, and you're going to have a very easy life. So good work-life balance at those companies, and you get paid a ton. You're probably going to be negotiating your salary. Your equity in this case is probably going to be stock and RSU, and then you'll probably be getting a signing bonus as well. Startups tend not to do signing bonuses, but larger companies definitely do. One kind of caveat, I guess this is the edge case section, so it's not that weird, is that the large companies have huge economies of scale. And what that means is that like Shopify is hiring like 1,000 engineers this year, right? A lot of those are going to be new grads, right? And as a result of that, Shopify has a worked out playbook, and it might not cost them $15,000 to hire people anymore. It might cost them less, right? And the only way to scale is to make things more specific, right? So I think it's important to realize that like for large companies, the reason the flexibility goes down and the reason that like you need to be a little bit more careful about these things, not careful in the sense that you're going to blow up the deal if you negotiate, absolutely not, but just like keep in mind how flexible they can be, is that they have these huge economies of scale. They have teams that their sole job is to hire new grads, right? So just keep that in mind. Remote and contracting work, of course, is quite popular right now. Your salary is one of the major pieces of compensation, but it's not everything. In a lot of cases, actually, it's kind of 30% more expensive to hire people than your base salary, for instance. So if we're paying $100,000 a year, it's probably costing us about $130,000 to have you as an employee. The reason for that is, that's where the benefits plan comes in. That's where kind of employment insurance comes in. That's where kind of all these different things come in. It costs money to hire people that doesn't go to that employee, right? So just keep that in mind. When you get hired as a contractor, suddenly you don't have benefits. Suddenly you don't have mandatory vacation that must be paid out every year. Suddenly you don't have like all these different things. And of course, their loss is your gain, right? So if it costs a company less to hire you, there you go. You can now make that much more money, with some exceptions, right? So keep that in mind, right? So if you're working as a contractor, typically you're probably going to be taking a little bit of a higher salary than you would as a full-time salaried employee, mostly because you're probably saving that company money coming as a contractor. So keep that in mind. Cool. And then, of course, for intermediate plus, you're probably not watching this talk, but if you are, as soon as, fact of the matter is, as soon as you're not a junior developer, suddenly your value skyrockets in the market. I actually don't know where intermediate developers go, but clearly they don't exist anymore. The only talent you'll ever see come through your pipeline is new developers who are graduating from school. It probably costs $100,000+ to hire great intermediate talent. It's very expensive. It's very hard to do. It's very hard to source for. There are entire companies who exist to source for this talent for you on your behalf. So you have significant power advantage. I mean, this is pretty straightforward. So keep that in mind. After your first job, you've now made it to your second job. You have a huge negotiating window at that point. So that's typically why people tend to make more money when they switch roles. But yeah, I think important line here, and it ends the presentation, is that I think probably by then, though, you've realized that the compensation is the least important part of your offer, and it's way more important what you're doing, hopefully. Cool. So yeah, that's the presentation that I have. I think I'll take a look at the Slido, which I have not looked at all. And let's see if there's any questions. So yeah, we have a couple questions. One on, oh, it's the same guy. Okay, great. Yeah, so Marmot, let's see. So you've got two questions. What about the first co-op job? Would you negotiate then too? So again, like you should always negotiate. You should just see what they can do. Like I would say that for startup or for co-ops, sorry, generally like these are very fixed concepts. So it's likely the case that the company won't be able to do too much for co-op, sorry, co-op joiners, especially like for early co-ops. But again, it doesn't hurt to ask. I have been able to negotiate co-op offers. And yeah, I mean, even when they say that they can't do certain things, it doesn't mean there's not a workaround, which is kind of a weird concept as well. I will give one example. I won't name drop the company, but for my last and final co-op, so it wasn't my first co-op, I asked for, I negotiated the salary. They told me they didn't negotiate co-op salaries. And I was like, oh, well, you know, like I'm in, the company was in New York. I was like, I'd love to go back to Toronto every like month or so to like, you know, see my family. You know, that, you know, it would be ideal, right? Like, do you do travel stipends? And they're like, no, we don't do travel stipends either. But look, like what we'll do is like, the flight is like $350. So let's just give you a flat $350 extra every month on your salary. Like, is that not the same thing as a $350 raise? I don't know. You tell me. But yeah, they gave it to me. So yeah, you can do weird workaround things. Cool. Yeah. So Marvick also asked, so how do we find what we care about in terms of the CS industry? What do you mean by CS industry? Like, do you mean like the like role that you're in, or do you mean like academia? What do you mean by that? Can you clarify that, and I can answer that. Okay. What if you're currently at a startup but wondering if you should switch to a more agent type role? This is a really good question. I think that you'll probably know if that's the case. And I think probably the things you should be thinking about in that case, if I were you, is would I be getting more out of my experience if I had somebody helping me along the way? You know, would I benefit from stronger mentorship? And if that is true, then it probably is the case that you might want to think about moving to a larger company where that's a bigger part of the company. Maybe mid-stage makes more sense if you're liking most of the concepts of startup. Like, you know, like if you still like the ownership piece, if you still kind of are enjoying being able to dedicate a little bit more to your career, then maybe it makes sense to stay a little bit more startup-y. So maybe a mid-stage or kind of early mid-stage. That's figured out the mentorship part. But that's a good question. Yeah, and I mean, if you want to move to a more kind of agent role, I think that totally makes sense. Cool. I don't know if this is a planted question, but is my company hiring? My company is absolutely hiring. We're always hiring people. We're a startup. So yeah, I mean, we're actually sponsoring Hack the North as well. So if you're on the Discord, you can join the Lunch Club channel and come and meet me there. But otherwise, our website is just lunchclub.com. There's a careers page at the bottom. We hire interns, full-times. We don't hire into specific roles, so you can do whatever the heck you want. Front end, full stack, back end, machine learning, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, lunchclub.com. Cool. So essentially, when you get the offer, you can either negotiate the company to hire you part-time. Interesting. So you absolutely could. The thing that is about that, though, is that you probably want to let them know ahead of time. So companies don't just like willy-nilly hire. They hire because they need bandwidth, and they need people to be able to do the things that they need for their company to be successful, right? So if you make it to the end of the process and you're like, hey, look, actually, you're going to get half as much or even less work out of me week to week than you expected, they're probably not going to come to that negotiation table in a relatively good mood. We'll put it that way. So, keep in mind that like companies are looking to hire people for a reason. And certainly like the best outcome for a company is that they hire somebody who is definitely dedicated to their mission and what they're building and is happy in that role, and will produce. And, kind of the part-time thing fits a little bit less into the produce part, if you see what I'm getting at. But a lot of companies will hire part-time people. I think if you're interested in working part-time or you want to do multiple things, I would recommend consulting or something like that. A lot of companies will hire consultants, especially if you're good. Can we negotiate working from anywhere in the world before signing the offer? The answer is like always yes. I mean, I think you can negotiate anything you want. Whether or not a company will give it to you, who knows? Lunch Club itself is a completely remote company. We have been for the entirety of our existence, so even pre-COVID. So this has never been a problem for us at Lunch Club. But I know that some big companies are hiring specifically into their offices. FANG in particular is doing that now. Some of them might be flexible, some of them won't, right? So there are large companies like Stripe, for instance, is another example where remote is one of their offices. So they have remote roles. And then there are other companies who are absolutely wedded to their offices and the places that the people work. An example would be like Facebook or Google. So it depends. In some cases, companies will be flexible and some won't. Cool. Lots of questions coming in. Okay, how does high quality mentorship compare to the kind of lessons you'd learn working at a small startup? Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 billion question, right? So I think probably the answer to this question is, what type of person are you? Like, what kind of learner are you? Are you somebody who learns best by doing, or are you somebody who learns best by getting guidance and advice from somebody? And because I think that kind of way that you think about working is going to probably change how much you get out of each opportunity, right? So, if you take a lot from being taught how to do things the right way, or taught very well, then, maybe it totally makes sense to work at a more, agent-based role where you have good mentorship, that type of thing. If you do really well in unstructured environments where, you're a solo person, you work a lot, you just do whatever you need to do to like get the thing out, then probably the startup is the right way to do it. So I would really think a lot about historically how you've done well. Have you kind of like hacked through your assignments, for instance, yourself without consulting the lecture notes, or like is the way that you start your assignment going to the lecture notes, right? If the way you start your assignment is going to the lecture notes, you're probably more suited, this is like a broad speaking thing, probably more suited to like, having people help you out versus like if you just like start hacking around and like you don't care, like if it takes longer, you're probably going the startup route, even though that's probably not the right way to solve that problem. Cool. How do you think people can get past the pre-screening interview, such as the video questionnaire? I'm pretty bad at that. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of great hiring, like being on the recruited end advice in terms of like interview prep and stuff. I would say that like, one thing that early stage companies especially are looking for are people who care about the mission. So, if you're sending a generic video or a generic like pre-screen question, or what's the thing, cover letter, for instance, to companies, and it's like super obvious, then like you can kind of tell that's not a big deal. I think especially for a small company, if you're hitting up the founder or an early employee, if you approach them with the message that like, look, like, and it's a very personal message that like you really care about what this is doing, and you use it, or you'd like to kind of build and work on it, you're going to get a reply. So I think authenticity is probably helpful in that first part. Maybe that's like my best advice from that perspective. I didn't even know there was like a video questionnaire thing. I think like that's like a new thing that I never had to deal with. Cool. Let's say you were to leave your current role. How would you navigate that being an early employee and probably quite embedded within your current company? I'll let you know when I do that. Yeah, I have no idea. I think that's a really difficult thing. I think that one of the problems with being, there's a downside here to the principal thing, which is that it is harder to unwind. It is harder to leave something you've spent a long time working on. I think the best advice I've gotten to this is that you kind of know when you need to know. And in a lot of cases, it's helpful to have like a journey for yourself around like what is it you want to accomplish, right? And if you're thinking about that in terms of you personally, then you remove the company aspect from it, right? And I think in that case, if you have a journey for like what you want to be able to do, and your current role, even being an early stage company with a lot of ownership, it is great, but it's not accomplishing that journey. I think that's a good indication. But the answer is like, this is a huge downside to having a lot of ownership, is that in a lot of ways, it's your baby, right? You don't really want to leave. So definitely. Yeah, so you mentioned intermediate plus developers. Can you expand on what that means? I think that's anything after a junior hire. So you join a company, you work for 2 or 3 years, or 1 to 2 years, depending on where it is and depending on where you are. And I think probably by then you're an intermediate developer. So that's all I meant by that. You mentioned it's best to negotiate over a call. Does that mean do everything in one go, or to hold a call every back and forth in negotiations? Typically, you're probably going to want to do everything in one go, which I realize is kind of a terrifying sentiment. So again, it's useful to know what you're comfortable with offering and what you're not. Of course, you can always back down. You can always say, okay, that's interesting. Like, let me think about that and I'll get back to you in like the next couple hours, right? And you can like de-escalate it. You don't need to do everything on the phone, but it is easier for your story about why you need this to be heard over the phone. So, if you can do the back and forth, that's even better, because it's just going to speed up that process for everybody, including yourself. But again, like if there's any time in the negotiation on the phone that you want to just like nope out, it's very easy to do so. Just say like, oh, I will think about this and I will get back to you. I think it's, don't feel pressured to like commit on the phone unless things are going the way that you want them to, right? Cool. Going into my 3rd year right now and still haven't gotten a call up. Do you reckon being in 3rd year increases the rate of getting hired in a company? I think for sure you'll have more experience. I think 3rd year helps a lot. Cool. Not able to find the sponsors Discord channel. Do you know where to find it? I do not. I think you have to opt into it if it's like last year. Yeah, I would maybe ask a moderator or somebody on the Hackathon Slack. Maybe not a moderator. I think I saw a message not to ask moderators questions. Okay. I think there's a help desk. Go to the help desk. They'll help you out. Winnie, don't kill me. Cool. Any questions otherwise here? Oh, sorry, Marvik, I missed your answer to your first question, which was all the way at the top. How do you find what we care about in terms of CS industry? And then you said it was actually role. There we go. You can join the #browse sponsors channel. Yeah, so how do you decide what you want to work on in terms of role? I think honestly, the right answer is just like try a bunch of things. You can largely get an idea of like the day in, day out by building like side projects and stuff of various roles. So if you are enjoying playing around with data and like moving around different pipes and playing around with that, like maybe data engineering. If you like the idea of being able to like generate results from large amounts of data, then maybe machine learning. If you enjoy like building really kind of clean algorithms that like do nice things and output good results, probably backend is the right call. And if you like care about like nice technical like attention to detail with like coding and that kind of thing with like on the front end for like what users see and that kind of thing, then maybe front end. The best answer to that is join a startup and just do all of those things, and then you will learn everything at the same time. Okay, there are more questions. Why did you choose to start Lunch Club? I didn't really start Lunch Club, actually. I was the first full-time hire at Lunch Club. So I have the title founding engineer. The reason for that is because we pivoted from a previous company to Lunch Club, which I had a large role in playing. So I didn't actually start Lunch Club itself, although I guess I kind of did, but not really. The TLDR is we were building a product for people to connect, people who had large networks, and it didn't work out. For a long story short, I know I'm running out of time, but yeah, we basically decided that we're really passionate about getting people to connect. We're really passionate about offline meetings, which is ironic now that COVID happened, and we grew a lot when we were online. And we thought, what's a product that we could kind of service this with, and Lunch Club ended up being that product. So it was a product that every week you would just get a custom intro to somebody within the community that we thought was relevant for you. Initially, we did this by hand. Now it's all done by machine learning. That was always going to be the idea. So yeah, that was kind of the impetus for Lunch Club. And yeah, still really love doing that part. Love meeting new people. Lunch Club's great for that. Cool. Do companies go and analyze your products on GitHub? I think some companies have like automatic ways of doing this. We don't. I think most small companies don't do this or don't have automatic ways of doing this. That being said, I actually look at GitHub a lot because I think GitHub links pretty strongly to like how often people ship code. And if somebody has a very active GitHub, that's a great signal. If somebody has, and that's the only way I think about it. If somebody has an inactive GitHub, I don't care. It's only if somebody has an active GitHub, this is a good signal for me. And there's no such thing as bad signals in this regard. So it's just an extra one. How much does co-op help with getting a job after graduation? Does it give the upper hand when negotiating an offer? 100%. Co-op is probably the best thing you can do when you're negotiating an offer. Least of all for the reason that you actually know how much you should be paid. I think when you're going in and getting your job for the first time, you ask yourself a lot of these questions. You don't really know the value of what you're bringing to the table. By the time you get there after co-op, at least for Waterloo, you've done this 6 times. You know what you've previously been paid. You have a benchmark. You probably want to make more than that. Very, very helpful in that regard. How would you recommend going for a software developer job as a high school student who is still learning? I think everybody is still learning, first of all. And that's important to realize. I think as a high school job, there are some of the larger companies might have student internship programs for high schoolers over the summer. That might be one easy way in. If you want to join a startup, some people don't care and will hire high school students. And I think that's totally reasonable. Everybody's learning, right? So maybe then that's the really passionate founder route. So send them a nice personalized note if you care a lot about what they're doing. But yeah, I think, at some point, I think Shopify had a high school student program. I don't know if they still have it. But yeah, I mean, I think kind of the route is a mix of like, I think there are existent things that you could probably leverage for that, as well as don't be afraid to like cold email people doing things that you want to do and ask them, how can I do those things as well? I think in a lot of cases, if it's personalized and they care, they will tell you. Cool. I'm 3 minutes over time. So I'm going to wrap up here. I think I answered all of the questions. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming, everybody. I think this goes up on YouTube afterwards. So yeah, if you want to connect with me, I've had my Twitter at the beginning. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn if you want. But I really don't use LinkedIn at this point, to be honest. I'm kind of building a competitor. But yeah, if you want to hit me up on Twitter, that's my Twitter there. I just linked it. So yeah, cool. Thanks, everybody. I will catch you guys all later. And please say hi on the Slack channel or on the Discord channel. Sorry.